Annie Ubelis. Join Annie on Tuesdays and Fridays at 2 p.m. Eastern Time with an open chat room full of her regulars. And yes, you can even call in. Call 917-889-3675. That's 917-889-3675 to be a part of the action on the phone line. Not able to listen live? Not a problem. You can always catch Annie, the Radio Chick, and Southern Sense Talk Radio podcast in archives at southern-sense.com. So sit back, relax, and enjoy Southern Sense the right way.
Welcome to Southern Sense, here live on Blog Talk Radio, High Plains Media, SHR Media, Kinetic Hi-Fi, The Fix FM, out of Charleston, South Carolina. Still number 16 at the top 100 on Top Talk Radio. Who is that? That's me, Annie, the Radio Chick. Oh, man, we've got an exciting show today, and today we have a guest co-host because Curtis is out working the polls. It's a primary day down in Florida, and he's doing his civic duty, so sitting in for him once again is Glenn Atkinson. Glenn, welcome.
Well, thank you very much. Great to be here. Looking forward to the guests.
Yeah, we got two great guests. At the start of the show, we're going to have J.J. Hansen, a former Marine, a cancer survivor, and he is now the president and CEO of Patients' Rights Action. Let me see if I can get this correctly. Oh, man, I can really mess up a wet dream. Patients' Rights Action Fund. He'll be joining us at the start of the show. And then at the second part of the show, we're going to have Dr. Sean McFate. And what a name. What a name. He is a former parachutist, security expert. He has a book out. What the heck is the name of his book? Oh, man, I am telling you, I can really mess up a wet dream today. His book is Shadow War, up on Amazon. It's a Tom Locke novel, and the leading character he molded after himself. Oh, man, it's really active stuff. A fantastic book along the lines of Tom Clancy. So we got ourselves a great show lined up.
That's great.
Yeah. That said, matter of fact, I'm looking at the show description, and no wonder why I'm messing up so badly. I don't even have Dr. Sean McFate on there. I'm going to have to add him on after we go off air so people can find out where to get his book. That said, everyone that listens to the show knows that we dedicate each and every show to a fallen hero. And J.J. Hansen asked us to make this dedication on behalf of a friend of his, Marine Sergeant Ian M. Tawney, who died October 16th of 2010 while serving during Operation Enduring Freedom. And this is from An Afghan Hell on Earth for Dark Horse Marines by Tom Bowman. And I'm doing only certain excerpts because I can't. It's too much to do the whole entire thing. It starts off as I try to bring up the background music. In 2010, nearly 1,000 U.S. Marine officers and enlisted men of the 3rd Battalion, 5th Regiment deployed to rest of Helmand Province in southern Afghanistan. By the time the tour ended in April of 2011, the Marines of the 3-5, known as Dark Horse, suffered the highest casualty rate of any Marine unit during the previous 10 years of the war. NPR tells the story of this unit's 7 long months of war, both in Afghanistan and back home. The Marines of the 3rd Battalion, 5th Regiment remember Sanjin in southern Afghanistan, Helmand Province, as different from anywhere else they fought. Sergeant Daniel Robert describes it as hell. Lance Corporal Jake Romo calls it the Wild West. Lieutenant Colonel Jason Morris says he heard it described as the most dangerous place in Afghanistan. Morris was the commander of the Marines of the 3-5, known as Dark Horse, and Sanjin had been the battleground long before he arrived. The British were there for 4 years, but could only fight the Taliban to a bloody stalemate. Now the British were leaving, and Dark Horse Battalion moved in. Arriving in late September 2010, they learned the place fast. slogging through canals, fighting through dense vegetation, and patrolling a maze of narrow dirt roads bordered by 50-foot mud walls. A few weeks earlier in California, the Marines gathered to say goodbye to their families in the middle of the night at the parade grounds of Camp Pendleton, where the unit was based. Ashley Tawney was there with her husband, Sergeant Ian Tawney. They had known each other since they were kids. They had just bought a house, and Ashley was pregnant with their first child. Senjin was Ian's 5th deployment, Ashley says. This one felt different. I just remember driving in the car, and I would just say, I don't want you to go. And he said, no, I'll be fine. I need to go, and I want to go. And he always said, if you're on the varsity team, why sit on the bench, Ashley recalls. Ian had served in Afghanistan and in Iraq, and he would lead his own squad. They stood for hours that night at Pendleton. Then just before sunrise, it was time to say goodbye. Ashley kissed her husband. He said, I love you. And I just nodded. I didn't want to start crying by saying it, she said. Sergeant Tawney boarded the bus that would take him to his plane for the long flight to Afghanistan. A few weeks later in Afghanistan, Tawney led his men on a patrol. The situation was extremely dangerous. The Taliban had stockpiled weapons and poked holes in the thick mud walls to use as shooting positions in order to ambush the Marines. Ashley and Sergeant Tawney had known each other since they were children. Ian Tawney was killed October 16, 2010, by an improvised explosive device while on a foot patrol in Senjin. As she says, she doesn't know how she made it to the door the day the Marine officers came to her house to tell her her husband was dead. At home in California, Ashley Tawney remembers waking up from a nap on her couch. It was the middle of an October afternoon. The house she and Ian had recently bought had several French doors. Through the glass of one of them, she watched 2 Marine officers pass by. She didn't have to open the door to see them standing there. It was just a real solemn, a very eerie sight. It was like the movies, just like the movies, she recalls. To this day, she doesn't know how she made it to the front door. I floated over there or something, she said, and everything was kind of slow motion. And I opened the door, and then they started off with the whole spiel, and I was in shock. I remember my cat was playing with the chaplain's uniform. Then they started to do the paperwork. The whole, me, going to Denver to meet his body. And that's when it hit me. And I just covered my face with my hands. And it was like, oh my God. Oh my God. There's no goodbye. There's no nothing. I couldn't fathom that he was gone, she says. Today's dedication is dedicated to Sergeant Ian Tawney. It is also dedicated to all the brave men and women in uniform who serve our nation, those that have served, who are serving, and will serve. And we also dedicate it to the brave men and women who every day respond as first responders to protect and service. We dedicate this show and this song, My Name is America, by Todd Allen.
In the grip of oppression, I fought for my liberty. I paid with the blood of my people. Freedom has never been free. Now my door's always open to dreamers and friends. When I'm attacked, I protect and defend, because my name is America. I stand proud and free. My name is America. Don't tread on me. I others gave it to me. They believe in the virtues I stand for, my respect for humanity. Now I'm challenged by tyrants who envy my power, but their vicious deeds become my finest hour, because my name is America. I stand proud and free. My name is America. Don't tread on me. I cannot be broken. I cannot be shamed. If you hurt me, I'll get stronger, and I'll rise up from the flames, and I'll always stand proud and free. I'm America, don't tread on me. America is my name. For those who need me, I'll always be here. For those who will harm me, I'll face without fear. But I'll always stand proud and free. I'm America, don't tread on me. I'm America, yes, America is my name. It's my
apologize. I had a little bit more to add to that dedication. It's just another paragraph, so I just want to add this. It was from AP, The Oregonian, by Alyssa Karras, and she wrote, Marine Sergeant Ian M. Tawney always maintained close ties to his roots in the small town of Dallas. But even from an early age, he loved to explore. Tawney's sense of independence manifested itself when he organized a year-long trip to the Argentina at the age of 15, and his enthusiasm for life became evident when he returned spouting fluent Spanish. As a very young child, he had a very strong sense of self and was very decisive about what he wanted to do with his life, his mother said, Theta Tawney. So when Tawney, 25, joined the Corps, his work ethic quickly distinguished him, and he won several awards. But his life was cut short October 16, 2010, when he was conducting combat operations and was killed when an improvised explosive device blew up in Afghanistan's Helmand province. Friends and family remember Tawney as a devoted father, a loyal friend, and an avid outdoorsman. It's hard when you've lost someone, and you try to define who they were, said his father, John Tawney. Tawney was soon to be a father himself, as Ashley was expecting a baby girl in January of 2011. That girl was born. Her name is Claire. He was honored to be a member of the Marine Corps, his father said. Among Tawney's numerous awards was the Purple Heart, the Combat Action Ribbon, the Iraq Combat Medal, and the Navy Unit's Commendation. Even though he didn't like to call attention to himself, he was a natural leader. And that was the final to the dedication. All right. We're waiting for our guest to call in. J.J. Hansen, a former Marine. Actually, you're never a former Marine. You're always a Marine. And he is now the president of the Patients' Right Action Fund. So, Glenn, we got ourselves an exciting show lined up. I want to welcome everyone that's listening in on the switchboard and those that are in the chat room. And we have so much to talk about. So much that is going on out there today. And more Hillary emails are coming out.
Oh, yeah.
Will it never stop?
Probably not. And, and that's the thing. It's very revealing, too. And a lot of people are starting to catch on to this, with all this social media and, the internet. Everybody's starting to see that there's a lot more negative with her than they even realize, and that's good.
And let's hope that outweighs the negative that Donald Trump has, because he's still doing foot and mouth disease. I just wish he would stop that. It's one thing to express outrage when you still see black-on-black crime, and no one in Black Lives Matter is in Chicago or Detroit decrying that. But it's another thing when you end up with foot and mouth disease. So
right. Exactly.
Well, let's welcome our guest aboard. His name is J.J. Hansen, and he is the founder and president of the Patient Rights Action Fund. Good afternoon, J.J.
Good afternoon. How are you both doing today?
Hanging in there. I'm always a little discombobulated. I mean, sometimes I can make a wet dream look like a nightmare, but it's one of those days. Anything that can go wrong will go wrong.
That's the nature of it, right?
That it is. Tell us about yourself, because you yourself are a cancer survivor. I can't say a former Marine, because I was married to a Marine, knows that a Marine is never former. Once a Marine, always a Marine.
Once a Marine, always a Marine, semper fidelis, always faithful. I served as a Marine. Oh, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Matter of fact, I wanted to make note that yesterday was the 100th anniversary of the Marine Corps Reserve. The Marine Corps itself goes back to 1776, wow. But see, I keep up on things. I keep up.
You do? That's wonderful. Yeah, I served as a Marine Corps infantry officer for about 4 years. Served in Al-Ramadi, Iraq, came back to the United States, worked in government for quite a few years. Went into the private sector, and I was working actually down in Tampa, Florida, for a startup real estate investment and management company, and really was living the American dream. We had a wonderful time with my job. I loved what I was doing. My family life was wonderful. My wife and I had just had our son. He was about 1 year old, and things could not have been better for us. And I was at a meeting, and we were having lunch together, myself and some former colleagues that I had known from previous work. And we were talking about potential work that we were looking to get done with the company. And in the middle of the meeting, I started to feel what I could I would say the closest thing to it would be an intense anxiety attack, something was just simply wrong with me. And I finally interrupted them during the conversation, and I said, something's going wrong with me. You need to call 911. And they looked at me and they said, "Are you kidding right now?" I said, "No, I'm not kidding. You need to call 911. Something's wrong." And that's when my ability to think normally, my cognitive ability, started to diminish. And I had to walk outside to get some air to try and breathe, and that's the last thing that I could remember. From there, I had what's called a grand mal seizure. That's one of the severe seizures that you can get where your body shakes and you start to bite down, grip very hard. And fortunately, at that exact moment that they were calling 911, there happened to be an ambulance driving through the intersection near the restaurant that we were in. And one of the gentlemen who I was with ran out into the street and chased down the ambulance, which they were able to get me to the hospital very quickly. Did a number of tests. They tried to find out what was going on with me. They couldn't really find anything wrong, and they were going to release me. And ultimately, my wife, at this point, I still had not fully recovered, so I had some memory issues, had some speech issues at this point. My wife fought with the doctors and said, "We need to do an MRI." And they said, "Well, it's really expensive on your insurance plan. We don't think that you need it. We've done all the blood tests. We've done this test. We've done that test. There's really nothing wrong. Many people get seizures." And my wife said, "No, I'm insisting. I want an MRI." So she fought with them to get the MRI. Doctor came back a day later and said, "Okay, well, everything looks good. We're going to release him." And my wife asked them and said, "Well, what happened with the MRI?" And they said, "Well, no one talked to you about it?" And she said, "No one discussed it with us." And so she said, "Okay, well, hold on. I'll be right back in a few minutes." Came back about 10 minutes later, and he said, "Well, you have 2 lesions in your left temporal lobe. And it could be an infection, but likely it's cancer." And that started a journey which has just been a major, major shift in every aspect of our life, and has brought me to where I am today of fighting the legalization of assisted suicide.
they told you had 4 months to live, and you went through the surgery. You had to relearn how to talk, to read, to write, to walk. And here you were, a combat Marine, and you had to learn baby steps.
Absolutely. It was a very difficult process. The initial diagnosis is they gave me a diagnosis of a rare form of brain cancer, which is called grade 4 glioblastoma multiforme, also known as GBM. The nickname for it is the Terminator of cancer, because approximately 75% of those who are diagnosed with GBM will die within the first year. Approximately 90% will die within 3 years. The initial diagnosis, or prognosis rather, that I received was that they told me I would have approximately 4 months left to live, that it was inoperable, there was nothing that they could do, and quite honestly, the doctor said, go home, enjoy the time you have left. My family and I, we went out and we got a second opinion. We fought as hard as possible to get that, and then we went and we actually got a third opinion. Finally, we found a surgeon at Memorial Sloan Kettering in New York City who was willing to do the surgery, and he did so very successfully. He had a wonderful job with the surgery, got about 99% of the tumors removed, and not only did they remove the initial 2 tumors that they had found via the MRI, while doing the surgery, he found a third. He actually found a third tumor within the left temporal lobe. Unfortunately, as I was recovering, and typically in many cases after this type of brain surgery, people have a fairly decent recovery, and you don't have any major significant problems. But I had some significant swelling within the brain, and as my brain continued to swell, they couldn't figure out what was causing the existing swelling. And I started to lose all of my basic cognitive abilities, the ability to walk, talk, read, write. All those things kept getting worse and worse, and no one knew why. Yet again, for a second time, my wife advocated on my behalf and fought for me, and she went out and she told the doctors we needed to do a test, and so finally they tested me for seizures, and I went into a period while they were doing the test where I started to click my fingers, snap my fingers, and I was pointing to my brain. I couldn't communicate at this point. I couldn't talk. I couldn't write. I couldn't do anything really. And my wife said to me, are you having a seizure? And I started to shake my head, yes. And I was going into a full seizure. And over the next 24 hours, while still in the hospital, I had 9 total seizures. Jeez. And that really diminished all of that basic cognitive ability that I had. And it took me several months, almost to a year, to recover to the level that I am now, where I could continue again to walk and read and write. And everything started, as you said, with baby steps. Now I go out and I run half marathons. I do it quite well. Read, write, just the same way that I used to. There's still some certain levels of disabilities that I deal with, but they're nothing that is significantly major. But we fought hard, and I was very fortunate to have a lot of supportive people around me. And I'm no stronger than anyone else who's going through these type of difficult situations. I just was very fortunate and very lucky in a lot of different ways.
Now, because of everything you went through, you actually at one point had contemplated suicide.
Yeah, that's really what brought me into this issue of assisted suicide. There was a certain point in my recovery. It was month 5 in my recovery. It was September of 2014. And during that period, this was when I hit my worst. When I started out in the battle against a terminal form of cancer, and they told me that I only had 4 months left to live, I was motivated. I'm a Marine. Marines are meant to fight. It's what we do. And I was going to do everything I could to fight, everything I could to make it through this. And I was really, really active in trying to find every possible opportunity we could. But in month 5, I was going through an experimental trial drug, and it was always easy to remember because it's MK-1775, which is very close to Marine Corps 1775, as you know. And so I had this drug, and it really altered the side effects that I would get from the chemotherapy. So typically you have side effects from chemotherapy, but I had heightened side effects. So I was in a lot of physical pain as a result of the drug that I was taking. And at the same time, I was going through some pretty significant difficulties with my family. My wife was dealing with the stress of having a husband who she might lose. And nothing had changed really in the long-term prognosis of the disease. So ultimately, the outlook was that I would die from that disease. And I remember sitting in my bed, and I couldn't get out of it for 4 weeks. And I was in bed, and I asked myself the fundamental question: is this worth it? Is it worth the pain? Is it worth the difficulty that I'm going to be putting upon my family? Is it worth going through this process if I'm going to die anyway? And ultimately, my quick answer was no. I have to keep fighting. I have to keep going. And at the same time, I'd just gotten back some of the basic abilities to read. I was listening to some different things on audio, and there was a book called Love, Medicine, and Miracles by Dr. Bernie Siegel. He was a Yale professor and a surgeon. And he broke down those who had a terminal disease into 3 categories. And the top category, those are your exceptional, motivated patients who are going to go out there and do everything they can to fight. And I put myself into that category. And then there's those that are in the bottom 20%. And they don't want to fight, they don't want to go through it, they just want their life to end, and that's okay too. If that's what they want to do and they're at the end of life, that's okay. The problem comes for the center, and that's the remaining 60% of the average American. And they don't know what to do. They're looking for guidance. They're looking for someone to help them in their battle and their struggle. And they're looking to their doctors, to their caregivers, to those around them, to their family. And what really concerned me going through this emotional experience of going through depression and questioning whether my own status of continuing to fight, knowing that I was a fighter, is if I'm questioning this, whether this is worth it because of this instant moment of difficulty, what is everyone else going through? And that, at the same time, I was reading the story about a young woman in California who had the same exact disease as I did, grade 4 glioblastoma multiforme. And her choice was to move to the state of Oregon and to end her life using these assisted suicide drugs. And I said, what kind of example is that setting for those of us who are going through this difficult situation? I was one of the stronger ones, and I managed to get through it and continue to fight. And thankfully, now I'm over 2 years later, I'm doing fine. I'm back to normal. I'm back full-time to work. I'm motivated. I'm loving every aspect of my life. But what happens to those people who are in that center 60% when they go through that difficult period? Would they make it through it the same way I did? Or if they have this option of assisted suicide, would they say this is the easier option and give up their life? Because they're in a state of depression. They're in a state of emotional distress. They're going through that pain. Now, would they regret that decision? Obviously they would. Would their family regret that decision? Yes, they would. The pain that it's going to cause to their family is just incalculable. And that's what really motivated me to get involved into this issue of assisted suicide, because it really it's taking away this fundamental and important factor of fighting a terminal disease, and that's hope. 15% of the time, doctors, when they give a prognosis, they are wrong. They are incorrect in that prognosis. So people can outlive their prognosis. I'm a great example of it. And I talk to people every other day who go through similar things, who they were told by a doctor that they can't beat this disease, and they do. And in my case example, which is just one of many, I was told not once, not twice, but on 3 separate times by 3 separate doctors that there was nothing that I could do about this disease, and yet I'm still alive. So that's the huge danger here.
It's an amazing, amazing story, and I can relate in some ways because my husband 6 years ago was told he had 6 months to live, and he just pulled out of the driveway to go to Advanced Auto for some car parts. It goes to show how correct that doctor is. I think of what a lot of my family had gone through and the fighters that we are, and I can't imagine allowing a doctor to tell me, that's it, give up. Even though I have at times had doctors do that. And I can't fathom that they would allow a person to give up so easily. But the doctors there's a large portion of them out there that are now out doing this. They're falling into the idea that life is expendable. Take the easy way out and don't bother fighting anymore. Just give up, because now you are a burden onto society, because now we got to take care of you, and now you're going to cost the insurance so much money to help you survive, as if your life wasn't worth that money. This is what I find so horrifying in this whole situation.
Yeah, and that's a big part of the problem. As I've learned more about this issue over the past year and a half, really it's alarming, and it's not what people perceive it to be. When you ask the average person, the way that it's promoted is that this is death with dignity and this is a personal autonomy. It's an individual decision to do for themselves what they want. It doesn't hurt anybody else. When in reality, it does hurt a lot of other people, because it's a change in our culture. It's a change in the way that we're viewing patients and that we're viewing people in their moment of need. And as you said, it's this outlook that they are a burden upon society, and it's an ideology, and it's a scary one. But the proponents of assisted suicide are trying to push this because they're more focused on their own personal needs than the needs of their fellow Americans. And that's the danger, is because now the ability of someone who wants to fight, who wants to live, that's being taken away from them. Now, that's not to say that if you're in a terminal disease and you are at the end of life and you've lived a good life, you've had a wonderful life, you're there with your family, and you no longer want to continue to go down that path, I'm not saying that someone shouldn't have that opportunity. The problem becomes is when you organize this in a government way so that you are being provided the ability to kill yourself, well, that's way over the line. Someone can go out today and they can die naturally and peacefully and have a dignified and beautiful death. I've seen it. I was there with my grandmother. She was 88 years old, and I was at her bedside when she passed away from cancer. It was beautiful. All of her 23 grandkids, with the exception of one of my other fellow Marine cousins, all of them were there to be with her, and it was beautiful. It was not somehow undignified. So to say that the only way that you can have a dignified death is if you do it through assisted suicide pills, it's completely false. And I think the other good point that you made is that this is about the way that our insurance system is being provided. There was a book that was written by the founder of the Hemlock Society. I'm sure you're familiar with the Hemlock Society. It's really where the movement of assisted suicide and euthanasia came in the late 1970s and the early 1980s. But the founder of that organization wrote in his book that the issue of assisted suicide will not be one based upon as a social issue. It'll be one as a financial issue. And what has happened in the past 10 years that has changed the financial components of the way that healthcare is provided and health insurance is provided within our country? Well, Obamacare or Affordable Health Care Act, whatever you choose to call it. But no matter what, that has changed the way that insurance companies receive their profit. They are a business. They have to receive a certain amount of profit. So now you're giving an insurance company to make a decision for you. So the choice is no longer yours. It's the insurance company's choice. Are we going to cover you with these expensive experimental trial drugs or these expensive chemotherapy drugs? Or are we going to give you this alternative of this cheap alternative of assisted suicide? Well, which way are they going to go? They're going to choose the cheaper of the alternatives. They already consider you a terminal patient. There's no way that they can save you. So why are they going to spend the money? They're not. And we've already seen this happen multiple times. And that's the alarm. A lot of people say, well, JJ, you're saying that, but that's kind of extreme. I can't imagine that that's going to happen. It has already happened. It's already happened in the state of Oregon.
Well, it's happened.
So that's
you have there were several articles that were really great that you had interviews with. Matter of fact, one of them I have up on the show page. People can read it. I've got the one from World Magazine sitting right next to me. But what we're seeing right now, and I have this every single month, when I go for my heart medicine, the insurance company keeps on sending me this thing saying, well, there are these other alternatives to this medicine, because it's costing me close to $400 a month for the medicine. So they want me to go to a cheaper generic that's not going to work as well. And my cardiologist goes, they're going to kill you if you switch to these other medications, plain and simple. We're seeing it today. And this idea with Obamacare, and I read both the Senate and the House bills before they were passed, before Nancy Pelosi said you got to pass it to see what's in it. I read it and I wrote about it extensively. We are not individuals. We are called units. And they do it as a per unit cost, with the maximum care going to the individuals between the ages of 18 and 35. So if you're younger or if you're older, you're not going to receive the same level of care. So we see it already in our society. They're going one step further and saying, all right, fine, your life is no longer worth saving. You are going to cost us too much, so go ahead and just die.
Yeah, it's a really scary change in the social norms of our country, where you're looking at historically those who are the most vulnerable are the groups that we try and take care of, the groups that we try and help. Where now the shift is to say that if you are at the end of life and you are going to be a burden upon our family, or you are going to be a burden upon the costs of what we're spending on health insurance, that you should then somehow be removed. There have been numerous studies of those in the states where assisted suicide is legal, of why they actually choose to go the route of assisted suicide. And many people believe that it's because they're afraid of pain and that they don't want to go through any physical suffering. That's what the public is, not only some of them believe, but it's also what the proponents of the legalization of assisted suicide continue to push. Creating a story that a lot of people go through pain, when actually very few people go through pain at the end of life because of good palliative care that we have within this country. But according to the surveys that have been conducted and the research that's been done, the majority of people who have chosen to go the route of assisted suicide have done so because they consider themselves to be a burden upon their family. Because they consider themselves to be a burden upon their family. That is a concern. People should not be ending their life when they can survive and spend time with their families and their friends and end their life naturally with dignity because they're being told that they're a difficulty. I mean, that's just, it's a major social change within our country that we should be very concerned about.
Well, I can also say that it's a large part of the problem with the society where we no longer venerate our elders. You know, it used to be they were the ones that were teaching us. Their history, their experiences is what they would bestow upon us. Instead, we shove them in a nursing home, we close the door, we walk away, and we visit only on birthdays and holidays.
Yeah, it's a very scary part. And many of the groups that are opposed to assisted suicide are very concerned about how the elderly will be treated if this becomes the national standard. You look at the elderly, many of them who are going through this difficult period at the end of life can be taken advantage of. You have within this country, and I know it's pretty significant in the Northeast, it's significant down in Florida, number of other states where you're seeing the growth of the heroin epidemic. Heroin is a very scary drug, but it's become cheaper within our country, and there are a lot of people using it. And those who are addicted to heroin will make really, really bad decisions. So according to the legislation of assisted suicide, you can have two witnesses that sign off that you want assisted suicide. One of them can be related to you. So if you are an elderly person and you have a grandson who's addicted to heroin, and he has his girlfriend there with him, they can sign off as the witnesses that this is what you wanted. That is scary.
That is
scary. That is a scary situation.
That is extremely frightening. That's extremely frightening because, you know, as a retired New York City cop, you know, I know what drugs do to people. I've seen it firsthand. And they will go to extremes just for that next fix, even if it means killing your relative, killing your wife, your girlfriend, your kids to get to the money or whatever they can sell for the money to get those drugs. And it's a very scary thought. Elder abuse is on the rise within the United States. And you're fighting this legislation for the assisted suicide because in the legislation, it can be a non-terminal patient. So if you're simply depressed or you're just simply old, you can have assisted suicide?
Well, it depends on the state in the legislation. Some states require 6 months left to live and a terminal diagnosis from a doctor, and the doctor has to sign off. Some require that not only a doctor, but a secondary doctor will have to sign off as well, in addition to the witnesses. Each state is a little bit different, but most of them are based upon the model that was created by an organization known as Compassionate Choice. It's kind of a strange name for an organization that is pushing the legalization of assisted suicide. But the reality of the way that the law is written is that there is very little oversight and there's very little controls in place to protect those from persuasion or to protect other people from trying to influence you. And that's something that, again, we've seen already happen. We've seen it already take place. So this idea that there is a safety here to make sure that you're going to be protected when you're in this vulnerable situation. Yeah, the case of depression. If you are depressed, are you going to be making a good decision? No. Well, the argument of the proponents of assisted suicide is, well, when you receive the diagnosis, you can be reviewed for a psychological evaluation. Not that you must be or that you should be, that you can be. Well, this happens in the state of Oregon less than 2% of the time where someone is actually considered for a psych evaluation. Spoke to a doctor in that same state, and I said, how many people at this time of their diagnosis are actually in depression? He said approximately 25%. So that's alarming. Now, here's the second part of this. So you receive those pills. Say, in my case, we'll use my case as a good example. So when I received my diagnosis, as I told you, I was motivated to fight. I was going to do everything I could to keep going. So I could have received those pills at that moment. I had a terminal diagnosis. The doctors could, if it were legal in the state that I was in, they could have given them to me. I would have taken them home. I wasn't depressed at that time. There was no difficulty that I was going through, other than obviously going through a traumatic situation, but I was going through it and fighting in a positive way. In month 5, when I went through depression, and when I considered whether the fight was worth it, I would have had those pills right next to me. I would have had them at my bedstand when I was going through that moment of difficulty, when I was legitimately depressed. When I was not in the right state of mind to make that decision for myself, I would have had those pills with no oversight, no doctor, no one checking in on me. I was at home. I could have taken those pills at that particular moment, and it would have ended my life. And you can't undo that. You can't unmake that decision. You don't get a second chance on that one. You're gone.
Yeah.
There's always someone that you can reach out to if you are depressed, someone that can always give you a hand, even if it's an ear to listen to. Because I remember one evening, I'm racing because I was living on Long Island and I had a friend living over by the Fort Hamilton in Brooklyn. I'm racing from my house all the way over to his apartment because he's threatening to kill himself. And, I get there, thankfully, I was able to talk him out and make sure he made the phone call to the department shrink to get himself into psych services to have that help he needed. Sure, he got put on the rubber gun squad, but there's always help out there. And the assisted suicide, physician suicide, takes that help away. It says, don't even think of help. Don't even think about it. Just take the easy way out, make everyone else happy, and, just go. Just stop bothering us. That's how I see it.
Yeah.
And I cannot value human life that lightly. And unfortunately, this physician of suicide values life lightly.
Well, you brought on a good point, and that is of how is this going to impact depression and suicide? You have a problem within this country that we've seen over the past 10 years where suicide rates have continued to increase around the country. General suicide rates. What we've seen in the states where this is legal, you're seeing a higher increase in suicide rates in those states than you are in other ones. So you have what's called a suicide contagion, where there is a growth in general suicide, and now you're normalizing it with the legalization of assisted suicide. You're glorifying it. The media is portraying people who conduct assisted suicide as this is somehow heroic or courageous. But it's not heroic or courageous. So to do that, then you're enticing others who are going through difficult situations in their life. Where do you stop? Where does it end? No, you just continue to build general suicide. And people who are going through these difficult parts of life, whether it's depression or psychological difficulties, they're no longer seeing this as, I should continue to try and get help or try and work my way through this. They're saying that suicide is okay, it's all right if you're going through difficulties, and it's the easy way out. And we're looking at large numbers of veterans. We're looking at large number of teenagers. We're looking at large number of doctors, of young age doctors who are committing suicide because of the difficulties of what they're going through. So now we want to legalize assisted suicide and make this even worse. And we can see the slippery slope here. Right now we could say it's 6 months left to live is considered a terminal disease. Well, again, in the state of Oregon, they're looking now to expand it out to a year. That's very alarming.
It is alarming. Wow. Because the 24% increase in suicides in just the last 15 years. Since 9/11, a 24% increase in suicides. And we're losing, 22 veterans a month to suicide? It angers me. It really angers me, because the same group that is pushing this physician-assisted suicide is also the same group that is the proponent to pro-choice. I mean, a baby is an innocent. It hasn't even had a chance at life, hasn't committed any crime, and it's being butchered. And now you're doing this to the elderly. Again, it's opposite ends of the age spectrum, the very same thing that's in Obamacare. You care about this only core group of people, and the heck with everyone else. And it gets me just so frustrated and so angry, JJ. And I am so glad that you are out there and fighting for people.
Amen.
Yeah. Well, it's we have an interesting approach of what we do, and we work with different states, and we try to bring all parties from both sides of political aisles to come together on this issue. And it's one of the unique issues that we're able to do that. The Patients' Rights Action Fund, which I lead, is we focus singularly on one issue, and that's the issue of assisted suicide. And we found that the more we can educate the public about this issue, the more they come into agreement, whether they are on the right side or the left side, because people can see through it. Once you get people to understand the details of the legislation, which is hard, it's very hard to do today in our culture. People are constantly looking for that 1-second soundbite. They want to see that, and then they'll move on their Facebook page onto the next 10 things, and they'll immediately refuse to look deeper into it. So the best thing that we can do to fight this back is get people, regardless of what their background is in terms of politics or their religious views or whatever the case may be, get them to research the issue. And when they do that, they can come to an agreement and say, wow, this is not something I can put my name next to and agree with. Because it's not going to help people that are going through these difficult life situations. It's going to hurt them. It's going to lead to their end of life. It's going to take lives away. It's going to make people suffer more. One of the things that I just want to mention is that there's this idea that this is a beautiful way to die with assisted suicide pills. It's something that the proponents push very heavily. This is somehow dignified. In a 2013 report from the state of Oregon, they cited in that report that there have been approximately, I think it was about 23 to 25 cases where people have gone through a difficult death, meaning that they either regurgitated or they lost their bowel movements or they were going through shakes or they took these pills and they started to vomit on themselves as they took the pills. There were 6 cases where people took the pills and they regained consciousness. So they woke up. So they go through this beautiful, peaceful death where they're going to sleep with their family and their friends, and all of a sudden they reawake and they start throwing up on themselves. Is that what their definition of dignity is?
Wow.
So it's this idea of they're branding it. They're continuing to brand it and market it in a way that it's not being done.
And you have Hollywood, which comes out with movies like Thelma and Louise, Harold and Maude, and glorify suicide. We've got to turn around and just slap some silly sense into people. And your website, which is patriotsrightsaction.org, gives people information. And you ask people questions on your website. And you tell people, tell me what your story is. What did you experience? Let's spread the word. Let's spread the truth about that.
Absolutely. Yeah, we encourage people to go on the website, watch the videos that we have. There's a lot of compelling stories from many different people, and specifically where this is legal. A lot of people are having difficult situations. On our website, you can report what you're going through, report what you're experiencing. And those are the stories that we have to continue to tell. And that's what's going to show people the difficulties of legalization of assisted suicide.
Well, the other thing that you look at...
sorry.
Sorry, Annie. Say the other thing you look at is not just the legislation. You're also looking at the court cases, because in New York you had Vecchio and Quill that just got tossed out, but the judge that signed the decision on that, she wrote in there the closing paragraph, the rights of every individual to the possession and control of their own body. So in essence, she left the door open for the lawsuit to come back.
Yeah, a big part of the issue here is this idea of the personal autonomy, and I think that's what you're talking about in terms of the New York situation. The idea of personal autonomy. Now, you mentioned earlier I was a Marine, so I understand it. I went to another country in a war to fight for the idea of independence. But we have to be concerned very much as a culture when you have legislation that's being written that is no longer, if it's personal independence and it's only impacting you and there's no one else that's going to be affected by it, you can make the argument that that's independence, that our country is built on that, and that's what we should have. But when it impacts not only other people, but multiple people, hundreds of people, when it takes away their opportunity to live when they want to live, then we have a serious problem. We have a very serious issue, and it's not something that we should be able to support.
Well, Glenn, I didn't mean to cut you off, but go ahead and make your question or statement.
Oh, no problem there at all. Hi, JJ. This is Glenn Atkinson. Great to have you along with us. And, I thank God that you're still with us. You're a productive human being. You went through a terrible, terrible thing. And the influence that this government and media and whatever have you on assisted suicide, it's like they just discard your life. And it comes down to the money factor with them. It's like, okay, how productive is this person going to be? How much money can we make for them, or how much money is it going to cost us? And it's like, it's sad. It's sickening to hear that's what's going down. When God gives us a right to free will and do what we want to do, but we're being, everything. The government and everybody, most people seem to throw in there that if you're not productive, then you're not nothing to us. And and you're a living example of how you got through things with proper choices. You had the free will to choose that. They're trying to take it all away. You've touched on it through this conversation, through the talk here, and I'm just frustrated with how the government tries to get their hands in everybody's business and doctors and whatever have you, because they don't think that your life is good, but yet if it was them going through it, they'd want the choice to do what they want. They don't want people influencing them. What are your thoughts about other people like the doctors themselves or governments or whatever, how the pendulum swings when it's them in that position, they don't want anybody infringing upon them.
There's a lot of great doctors, and I've been very fortunate to have many of them. They saved my life. I mean, they really truly did. The doctors that ultimately ended up doing my surgery, the oncologists, many other doctors who have cared for, were part of my team. They were amazing, and those are the kind of doctors that we need more of. But as I said earlier, there were other doctors who basically wrote me off as this is over. The statistics say that you're going to die, so therefore you're going to die. And as we mentioned earlier, a lot of times people in these difficult situations will just listen to that, especially generationally. When you look at the baby boomer generation, they were brought up learning that from their parents that when you are told this is what the outcome is going to be from a doctor, you accept it.
Right.
And there's great responsibility there for doctors. One of the big fights that's going on right now is the American Medical Association. They are opposed to this. There have been, in the state of California, they went to a neutral position before they passed the legalization of assisted suicide, which was a big component of why some of the legislators said this is okay. It kind of gave them a little bit, to a certain degree, of political cover to say, well, they're not opposed to it, so we're okay. We need our doctors, and anyone who's listening, I encourage you to go out and let your doctor know why you think this is a bad idea. Go onto our website, research a little bit more. Do some of the, you don't have to listen to me. Go out there and do your own research. Make yourself an expert on the issue. But tell your doctors that you need them to advocate for you to not allow this to go forward. They need to become advocates against the legalization, against assisted suicide. They have an ethical responsibility to us as patients to give us the best care they can give us. They have to protect our existence. They have to protect our lives. They have to protect our families' lives. And we need to communicate that, let them know, and let them know that it's really important to us.
Amen to that.
Well, JJ, as I said, I had the links on the show page. Majority of people that listen to the show listen to the podcast and archives later on, so it'd be thousands upon thousands of hits on there, and I hope it really does generate more public interest in this issue. But I also wanted to let you know, to your friend Ian Tawney, I found a video that his wife put up with his daughter in it, and I had that YouTube video also directly below the dedication so people can actually see his young girl as she grew up, and she's a beautiful, beautiful girl, and they can learn more about Sergeant Tawney in that video and the dedication.
Thank you for recognizing it. It's greatly appreciated.
No, it has been our honor, and you do fantastic work, and I encourage everyone to check out your story. I have a link to the news article on the show page also. Check out the website and get involved, and let's protect human life. I got so angry today when I was doing some research last night. Someone put a question up, I think it was on MSN website, whether or not we should allow the Zika babies to be born. Is life that cheap now that we're even contemplating a question like that?
Oh.
JJ, just keep up the good fight and know you've got those of us out here that have your back for you.
Thank you so much, and I appreciate you having me on.
It has been our pleasure.
Thank you, Jade.
People, check out patientrightsaction.org and give JJ a hand. Donate, read the articles, and get involved. JJ Hansen. All right. Now we're going to just go take a break until we get our next guest up, who I have to call. So that said, we're going to use Susan Tom's song, Take My Hand, where she talks about helping those who need assistance and not taking their own lives. Susan Tom's. Check it out.
Among the stars and sky, feel my love. life that you dream of. Reach for me when you're ready to be free. Reach for me when you're ready to be free.
That was Susan Toms, Take My Hand. And we're back. You're here listening to Sense here on Blog Talk Radio, High Plains Media, SHR Media, Kinetic Hi-Fi, the Fix FM out of Charleston, South Carolina. Still sitting number 16 out of the top 100 conservative shows on TopTalkRadio.com. And my guest just dropped out of the room.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
No. Well, Glenn, I'm going to ask you to cover for me while I try to get him back in on the line. All right? So just keep on talking, and I'll be back.
Okay, no problem. No problem. No problem at all. Well, folks, that was an amazing guest we just had on with J.J. Hansen. And we encourage you to go to his site and get involved. This assisted suicide stuff is just abysmal. It's just terrible. Or they're taking the rights from people and just saying, here, go kill yourself. I mean, seriously, that's terrible. That's terrible. That's not what God wanted from us. You know, we are strong with God, but, you know, when we get involved with man, you know, they want to persuade us to do their way, and it's evil. You know, it's just not a right thing, you know. Going through what you're going through is not a great thing, but, you know, just be positive and we'll get you through. And that's all we can do, you know, just live for God and do what His will is, not just... Have we got our guest on?
All right, we're back.
Hello.
We're back. We got Sean McFate, Dr. Sean McFate, man about town. Welcome, Sean. Today's been one of those days.
Welcome.
Like
well, thank you. It's great to be here.
Anything that can go wrong is going to go wrong today, always. That's what live radio is about. Improvise, quick. And you know about that. Oh, man. I was reading your bio, and my head was spinning. I mean... You're 82nd Airborne. You served under Stanley McChrystal and David Petraeus. Jungle warfare. You were a military contractor. You've got a PhD. You've traveled the world and did just about anything and everything. Plus, you've got a book out, which is Shadow War, which is up on Amazon, which is a Tom Locke novel. What haven't you done?
Oh, there's a lot I haven't done. I am the father of a 6-month-old baby, so I've got to be a father. That's
Congratulations!
Exciting, but new. Thank you. A new adventure, unlike any other in the past. But you know, I think as a young man, I wanted to serve my country, and I wanted to see the world, and I did both of those things.
Well, that you did, and I guess the Army never trained you for changing diapers and chasing a toddler.
No, but I did a lot of other things that did prepare me. But yeah, there's no such thing as having a baby brings drill instructors in a whole new light. Nothing quite prepares you to be a father at 3 a.m. But he's a good little tyke, and my wife and I are really, really happy. So that's great.
Well,
awesome.
Tell us about the book Shadow War, because from everything I was reading, and I haven't had a chance to read the book, so I apologize, but it's loosely based, the character's loosely based upon you, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. So, Shadow War is a series of novels around this guy called Tom Locke. And these are like Tom Clancy-like novels. Mm-hmm. They are like espionage, military action thrillers, but they're based on reality. They're actually more non-fiction than fiction and explain like what's going on behind headlines. And this series began as a memoir I was writing about some stuff I was doing in Africa. And my editor and agent were like, Sean, you should turn this into fiction so you don't get sued to death. So I was like, okay, that'd be great. So Tom Locke is basically, he's a high-end special operations guy who now works as a contractor for the U.S. government, and he has a team of like very high-end special operators, and they're sent into Ukraine based on real events to contend with Putin's shadow war in Ukraine. Your listeners may remember or know that Ukraine, Eastern Ukraine is a shooting war right now.
Yes.
It gets eclipsed a lot too easily, but it's a real shooting war, and Putin is, I think, one of the biggest threats to our country. I mean, the man still has a nuclear arsenal that could evaporate us if he wanted to. And so, the U.S. government sends in Locke and his team to fight Putin in his shadows. They can do things that the CIA and the Department of Defense can't or won't do. And the book is a lot of fun to read, but you read it and you learn a lot about how Putin fights wars, how modern wars are fought, and what Putin has done to the country of Georgia and Ukraine, he's going to try to do in the Baltics, like Lithuania, Estonia. That's going to be one of the challenges of the next presidency.
Well, I have to tell you, in truth, I happen to be married to a Latvian. And he's collecting Social Security now, but he is so angry with what is going on over there. He says, at this age, I may simply go over there and pick up a rifle and start shooting. They have no idea how frightened people are. And the port of Riga is a very, very pivotal point in the Baltic Sea there. And Russia controlled it for a long time. And when Latvia declared its freedom back in the 90s, they lost the port. The Latvians actually went into the cemetery in Riga and started digging up the Russians to send them home from the cemetery. I don't know if you're young enough to remember that, but it was a mess.
I do. It is. I mean, people ask, like, what is Putin's end game, right? I mean, he's not trying to reestablish the Soviet Union. He's trying to become czar. He wants a Russian empire with him at the top of it, and he's trying to take back these countries that used to be under Russian control, like, again, the country of Georgia, Ukraine. And he doesn't need to take over the country with armored tank columns. He needs to just destabilizing it using what we call little green men, which are, and this is all in the novel, these are basically Russian soldiers in Ukraine who don't wear Russian insignia. He hires mercenaries. He uses covert units, these like special operations units called Spetsnaz units. He uses cyber attacks, he uses propaganda, and he destabilizes the government and then puts his own guy in there as a puppet. And he's done this successfully. He has a good model for this. He's done it successfully. He wants to do this with Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. Yep. There's no question about it. And the U.S. is, in my opinion, sort of out to lunch about this. I mean, we're having discussions about, whether we need to even have NATO. And this is what Putin wants to see. He wants to see a weak EU. We have that with the Brexit and other countries that might leave the EU. We have NATO looking, NATO doesn't really know what its mission is at 25 years after the Berlin Wall fell. And I think what the victims of all this sort of dithering are these countries like Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia. I think Poland's very worried. Bulgaria, Romania are very worried. Putin is he wants to extend his reach into Europe, and he wants to extend it down south into the Middle East, and he's getting away with it.
And this president has done so many things that were the exact opposite of what should have been done. Because if anyone remembers correctly, that as soon as Obama came into power in 2009, first thing he did was cancel the base that was going to be put in Poland, which would have prevented Russia from trying to encroach upon Poland. And Poland is still waiting for that base.
Yeah, Poland may never get it unless there's a different president. But Barack Obama's policies and foreign policy have been extraordinarily weak. It's always an abdication of leadership, of American leadership. And he went into his presidency with a very strong national security team. Right? He had, for example, his national security advisor was retired General Jim Jones. He was a four-star Marine general, the Commandant of the Marine Corps, the former head of NATO. This man knew how to do these things, and he left in frustration after 6 months. And since then, Obama has really chosen to listen to the voices of two of the least, in my opinion, qualified people. One is, I won't go into the names, but like he has really kind of, the idea that you can reset U.S. relations with a whole region is bunk. You can't do that. That's not how international relations works. And he tried to do that in Cairo. He tried to do that with Russia. And I think we've been played. And the reason why Putin is so emboldened to do these things in Ukraine, in Georgia, is because of red lines are not met. The U.S. has no credibility at the moment when it says don't do something. Putin is sort of like a spoiled child. He doesn't have any limits, any boundaries. And I think this is what's imperiling the Baltic region. And we have to remember, it doesn't end with the Baltics. It just begins with these countries. I think much of Europe is very worried about Putin. Much of NATO is, but without U.S. leadership, NATO's it'll blow away. I mean, we're funding most of NATO, and we lead much of NATO too.
Well, I am not politically correct, so I will say the names of Hillary Clinton, Valerie Jarrett, and John Kerry. I have no qualms about that. You don't have to dance around here. We stomp on toes happily.
Well, that's just a few of them, but yes, absolutely. I think people ask me sometimes like what Hillary Clinton's foreign policy will be. Well, we know what it'll be, right? I mean, she was the architect of Obama's foreign policy program as his Secretary of State, and when she left that position, she was a lot more tough talk. But when she was in government, she wasn't tough action. There's a word action disparity there. So I think if she were to become president, we would see more of the same, frankly.
Wait. Hillary, isn't she the one who said she had nothing to do with the Iran deal? Right? She had nothing to do with that.
Well,
oh my goodness.
Yeah, I think that'll unwind itself over time. I mean, it's funny that during her time, one of the things she's very proud of is things like Libya, and Libya is a complete time bomb. I mean, that was the worst of all scenarios, where you had a terrible person, Gaddafi, in charge. Well, nobody liked Gaddafi, but at least he kept some semblance of order in a disorderly region. And you remove him from that, you remove this, it creates a vacuum of power, and it's been filled with ISIS, other terrorists, you name it. Libya is a time bomb, and we have yet to see it go off yet.
Now, I'm trying to figure out what the heck is going on in Syria, because now you've got Putin, who's backing Assad. Turkey is backing... Wait a minute. Now, isn't Turkey a NATO ally, but they're backing the rebels where we're backing Assad? I can't even figure out the players in this thing.
So the Middle East, first of all, the Middle East as we know it doesn't exist anymore. And there are countries and borders on a map, but they don't correspond to any sort of political reality on the ground. And I think, in the 90s we had this term called balkanization. Remember the Baltics kind of imploded in the 1990s, Serbia and we have now sort of the balkanization of the Middle East, the disappearing of the Middle East. And that place is really worrisome because it can lead to a bigger war, right? Like especially if Iran gets a bomb, Saudi buys a bomb from Pakistan, and we all know Israel has a bomb. It could lead to a big bang, literally. The big event that this happened this summer is that Turkey switched sides. So after, before that happened, we had a couple blocks. We had Russia, Iran, and Syria working with Shia in Lebanon. And then you had the U.S., Iraq, if so much as exists, Saudi Arabia, and to some extent Israel, which has really tried to keep itself away from all this, and then Turkey. Turkey switched. So after this coup d'etat happened a few weeks ago, of which it's still mysterious, right? We're not really sure who is behind that coup. Erdogan, the president of Turkey, has used it as a pretext to consolidate power with purges and everything else. He also flew to Moscow and met with Putin. And then now we're seeing Turkey align itself with the Putin-Iran bloc. And that is a huge shift of power going on right now. And I think what's going on is that Putin wants to be czar and Erdogan wants to be sultan. And both are men of immense ego and they consolidate power around themselves. And this is, I think, very dangerous for the Middle East. So even though Turkey is a NATO country, it's busy bombing Kurds that have been trained and equipped by the U.S. And this is a deliberate move to sort of give the middle finger, I think, to the U.S. and to NATO.
And a very deliberate finger, because they were supposed to also take in some of these refugees, which they have yet to do.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of problems. And the other problem we have is that, in some ways, Erdogan can blackmail the U.S. because a lot of our bombing campaigns in Syria and in Iraq against ISIS, they're all based out of Turkey. They're all on the border of southern Turkey. And Erdogan could kick the U.S. out if he really wanted to, and we have to take this into our calculus. If we were to criticize him too heavily, he could kick out our military forces from Turkey, and then it'd be even harder to hit ISIS.
It's such a confusing situation. But, what really gets me angry is that here you've got Hillary Clinton playing I had nothing to do with what's going on in Russia or Iran, and yet she's the very one that sold the uranium to Russia, and Russia in turn is selling it over to Iran to make the bombs that we were trying to prevent with the Iran deal to begin with. Nothing makes sense.
No, I don't know her exact role in that, but I do know that, Syria was imploding on her watch. And the U.S.'s position at that time was to do nothing, and the situation festered and got worse. And so now we're dealing with a much more difficult situation that could have been nipped at the bud much earlier. ISIS, remember, ISIS, I don't think it's fair to blame Obama for ISIS, but certainly our policies enabled ISIS. That much is true. And she was there at the beginning, so she cannot claim innocence or ignorance or anything else.
No, you can't. But with this Iran deal, ever since it was allegedly signed and we had our sailors that were captured and then ransomed back to us, along with the other 4 Americans that were ransomed back, but now they're going after our ships in the Gulf there. And it seems as if Iran has been completely emboldened, and every day you hear of another instance.
I think we can't forget that, despite how the administration has packaged the Iran deal, Iran is still fundamentally an adversary, and some would say just an outright enemy. There's a saying in international relations that, a country has no permanent allies, it only has permanent interests. And you need to, if you want to figure out what a country's going to do, just look at what its permanent interests are. Iran's permanent interests are not to work with the United States of America. Iran's interests, they're closely aligned with Russia. They have been for a while. I think their interests are to get a nuclear weapon. It makes sense. They've seen the North Korea example that when you have a nuclear weapon, people take you a lot more seriously than when you don't. And they're incentivized to do that. And no matter what we say, even, they could cheat on the Iran deal. And in a worst case scenario, if they continue it, we really can't stop it. There's nothing we could bomb them, but it would just set back the program by a few years. It wouldn't stop it. So Iran still is. It's not a solved problem.
Well, now I'm just trying to figure out how you can how Putin justifies himself with aligning with Iran when Iran is the biggest sponsor of terrorism and Putin is fighting terrorism that he has in the Ukraine. He doesn't want these Muslim terrorists in Russia, and yet he will ally himself with them.
Yeah, that's a great question. So Russia has a terrorism problem, just like we do. You just never hear about it because they have state-sponsored media, right? But they have problems in Chechnya, and they have problems with Muslim, extremists coming into Russia. So in the Middle East, there are two different types of Muslims. There's Shia and there's Sunni, and they're at war with each other, and they've been at war with each other since the death of Muhammad. This is an old 1,400-year fight, and there's not much that anybody can really do to solve that, because they want to the death practically, if not really. So he's aligned himself with the Shia, and I think we've aligned ourselves with the Sunni. And so Iran is like the epicenter of Shia Islam. Iran has a lot of state-sponsored terrorism, most notably Hezbollah, which is based out of Lebanon. It was created in 1983 with the sole purpose of destroying Israel. Now, in 2013-14, Hezbollah did something really interesting. They went into Syria to fight Sunni Muslim countries. Terrorists. So you have, like, part of the Middle East, you have terrorists on terrorists killing each other, which is fine if we could contain that, but we really can't. Now we're seeing terrorists crop up in Europe. We might see them coming to our country, and that's the problem with immigration, is that you really can't tell from these countries who's a terrorist and who's not. There's no, despite what the administration has said, there's no foolproof way to vet these people, and Europe is paying the price right now. So I think Putin also has that fear, but he's taking a side with Iran and with Syria. Syria is a proxy of Iran, basically. Iran's the big gorilla in the Middle East region right now, and he's siding with them.
Yeah, the refugee resettlement coming here in the United States, we've done numerous shows. Ann Cochran has a great website, the resettlement program website she runs up there. I've had my friend Mike Cutler talk extensively about the problems with immigration, and they want to bring in an additional 10,000 of these refugees to the United States. There is absolutely no way in which to vet them, because if you happen to be a Christian, the Muslim terrorists are going in there, taking all your identification and anything else you have to say who you are. So you can't even come in without any identification. And yet the terrorists have the ability to produce the passports, because when Benghazi fell, they got all these passports.
Yeah,
I'm doing a head slap here. I'm doing a major head slap.
No, it is true. I did this in Africa. So when I was a contractor, I was a military contractor in Africa for the U.S. government alone, and I did a lot of interesting things in Africa. That's another sort of radio program. But I worked closely with warlords and with other types of people that are unsavory. And I'll tell you what, in these countries, in war-torn countries, whether it be the Congo or it be Syria or Iraq or wherever, you have no way of establishing an identity. The United Nations has absolutely no way to establish identity. So in our country, we want to establish somebody's identity. We do a background check. We call it, they say they're from this high school. We call it the high school. Do you have a public record of this person being here? Is this who they are? Say they are. Yes or no. There's none of that exists in Syria. There's no Bureau of Labor and Statistics. There's no DMV to check. There's no records to check. So what is the UN checking? What's the U.S. checking? They're checking nothing. They're going around asking people with interpreters, are you who you say you are? And of course, if you're a terrorist who has, malignant intent, you just lie. And there's really little anybody can do to stop it. So I think, we need to be smart about who we let in from these war-torn countries. And that's, maybe un-PC to say, but, otherwise we might have a Belgium-like situation, like we remember in the spring, where Belgium has been way too liberal in letting any sort of immigrant from the Middle East settle in Brussels, and now they have a terrorist cell in their hands, and they don't know how to get rid of it.
Oh, it's absolutely stunning, because they have now all these migrants that are being dumped in Italy and Greece. They have no identifications. They're being dumped in these camps that are nothing more than like a mini prison. But these are the very people they want to send over here to the United States. So we have no way of vetting them in the least bit. And while you have someone in the camp saying, well, yeah, Mohammed Abed is here with his wife and children, or he claims these are his children, so let's bring them all in because it's a family. There's no proof that they're even are a family.
Yeah, and there is no way to do it. I mean, take it from me. I've actually been on the ground doing this for a couple of years. I didn't think, among other things, there's no way we can establish who these people really are, what their intentions are. And I'll tell you what, maybe like 99% of them are wonderful and good people who want to make an honest American living. But that 1% that gets through, that's all it takes, right? I mean, that's the concern. So I think right now the White House has sort of oversold this vetting program that I consider to be non-existent or just in name only.
Yeah, because in the past, it all changed in the 60s, but in the past, you had to have someone that sponsored you. You had to have a job lined up. You had to have a place to live. And you had to prove that you weren't going to go on the public dole for 5 years. But instead, we're welcoming them over. Here's the welfare check. Here's the food stamps. Here's the Section 8 housing. Here's the free medical care. Here's the free education. And by the way, because you can't speak English, we're going to make sure that you learn how to speak English and get your driver's license. And you're going to live in this separate community away from everyone else. And by the way, this factory needs workers, so you're going to be hired by them while you're collecting all this public assistance, and you're going to be hired for less than minimum wage. Bye-bye $15 an hour at McDonald's jobs.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of there's a lot of concerns about this. I mean, the federal government will say, well, after so many weeks, they have to be self-supporting. But we also know that there's a lot of federal safety nets there, and some are good, and some are very wasteful, and there's problems with that. But the thing that concerns me, though, about some of these communities, I got to be very careful because I don't want to be I don't want to paint too broad a brushstroke on this. Is that when a lot of our great-grandparents or grandparents came to this country, the idea, you had this social contract with this country that you would become an American. Everybody would have a shot, but you would, sort of integrate with this country and bring your own country, your own culture with you. You think of melting pots and everything else in parts of our country. I see like some immigrants from this part of the world also really don't want to integrate, I think, with this country. They want to maintain their own communities, their own education, their own sort of legal, their own kind of norms. And I just don't know where, that's a different prospect of integration than, say, the 19th century. And so there are other concerns, too. You have, Orlando, Florida is a good example of this, where you have this young guy who's of Afghan origin, and he decides he wants to martyr himself. And that's very hard for any law enforcement agency in any country to predict and stop. And that's the real kind of one of the threats of immigration in our country, this sort of come one, come all idea. I think we just need to be smarter about this.
If we go back to what we did prior to the 1960s, it worked. We would bring in people, because my grandparents, all but one of them, were all immigrants. Both of my grandfathers served during World War I. One was from Germany and one was from Italy, but they served in the U.S. Army. My father was a World War II veteran. But what we have is that, we have to have this diversity. It's no longer a melting pot. We have to respect their values. I disagree. They're coming here to the United States, which means they want American values, or allegedly want American values. And if they don't support American values, then we don't want you here, honestly. It may not sound like a Christian thing to do, but I welcome you into my church because you have the same value as I have. This is the same thing. This country is my church. These are my beliefs. But it's not that.
Well, I agree with you. I think that, one of the things I've been in favor of since I was, a young man was having some sort of national service required of all adults. And this could be 2 or 3 years. It doesn't have to be in the military. You can do it doing, driving an ambulance or doing social working or doing something that gives a greater purpose and sense of purpose than just serving yourself. And it also creates a bond, I think, with our country, because I think, being an American citizen, and I say this as somebody who served in the U.S. Army, being an American citizen is a privilege. And I worked in some very nasty countries in Africa where, people were considered prey by their governments, and it's horrible. And I think to maintain the respect and the dignity of this country, it's not too much to ask immigrants to absorb American values. I don't think that's, and to learn English and to obey the rules of the road and to pay their taxes, etc. I don't think that's unreasonable, and I think that my fear is we're losing that to some extent. So I would love to see some sort of national service program sort of instituted in our country again. That'd be, I think, would do us a lot of good.
Well, I think the biggest boost to the civil rights movement in the 1950s was Eisenhower integrating the military, because now you had the Southern crackers lying right next to in a bunk next to an African American. They had to get along, especially with the breakout of Korean War. You're in a foxhole fighting with someone that in the past you would have said, well, you use a separate bathroom or you sit in the back of the bus. Now your very life depended upon it. So if we do something like that, I think we can break those barriers and bring back the melting pot mentality of America.
I agree. I mean, I think, Truman, really desegregated the military. And I'm not suggesting we go back to a national draft. And I don't think our military would want that either. I mean, we have an all-volunteer force, which our military is very proud of. It maintains a very high quality of soldier, sailor, seaman, Marine. But I don't think everybody needs to be a lifer. I think, again, there's ways to serve our country that don't require you being in a military uniform carrying a weapon. But I think it would integrate, I think, in a positive way. No. I don't think it's very helpful to have like busing and stuff like that. I mean, I don't think that, I'm not proposing the military be a social laboratory and experiment, which arguably it has been in the past at times. But I do think that there's some value to doing that and learning this like service ethos. I think that's something that's also sometimes lost, and the privileges of citizenship are earned rather than taken.
No, that is true, because you also have the Peace Corps, and you've got, like a lot of churches, mine is really big on this, and doing missions and sending people to other countries. And you see how they are actually living where they don't have running water or electricity, and understand what the beauty of America is and why we are so unique. But instead, you've got out there Black Lives Matter causing riots, aligning itself with the Nation of Islam, and the public just eats it up as if this is everyday norm when it's not. It's not what our founding fathers envisioned, and it's not the America I believe in. But I'm digressing. I am digressing. I have a tendency to go on rants every now and then. But you mentioned Africa several times. And Africa, for a great many years, was the continent that was ignored. But now it's coming into a forefront in this war on terror and in other issues. I mean, people thought the Somali pirates was the big thing. But now, as you said, you served over there with the warlords. It's coming into its own. And I think it's an area that we have to keep a really close eye on.
Yeah, I mean, Africa, I spent several years in Africa, and I was basically operating in war zones. And Africa is a very, very dangerous place. First of all, the size of Africa, people don't realize how big it is. You can easily put 3 United States of America into Africa. That's how big it is. It's gigantic. It has all the natural resources it needs to feed itself in the world. It's one of the richest continents in the world in terms of natural resources. It's also one of the biggest continents in the world. It has just been plagued by conflict, corruption, bad government arguably for a very long time, almost forever. And, with really no end in sight. I mean, there are 2 different types of Africanists, I think. There are those who are very romantic and optimistic, sort of like those who watch the movie Out of Africa. And there are those who are kind of a little skeptical and a little pessimistic even. And that's I think that's the Africa that the business community looks at. Like when people say, well, why can't corporations go and invest in Africa? Well, the reason is because because they usually get fleeced by presidents, corrupt politicians, warlords, etc. But now, you see terrorism starting to, in addition to like all the horrible civil wars of Africa, they're ongoing to this day. Now we're seeing, Boko Haram in Nigeria. This is that group of like ISIS-like terrorists who kidnap 300 girls, out of high school, and basically it's raping them, again and again and again. You see, terrorism, this like ISIS-like Al-Qaeda terrorism. ISIS and Al-Qaeda actually having this competition in the Sahara region, the Sahel region, two regions I've spent a lot of time in. You've got Horn of Africa, like Al-Shabaab in Ethiopia and in Eritrea and, Somalia mostly. You've got a lot of problems in Africa that, as we're focusing our attention in the Middle East, Africa is starting to bubble in some very serious ways, and unfortunately, it's getting some attention, but not the attention it deserves, in my opinion.
Well, what do you see the next major problem coming out of Africa being, besides Boko Haram or ISIS?
This is a great question. So, there's a couple. There could always be. We're always worried about epidemics coming out of Africa. Remember, a couple, a year ago we had Ebola, et cetera. That could transfer very quickly around the world, right? There's unfortunately a lot of civil war and conflict, and it's Africa. Parts of Africa are a little bit like Mad Max and Thunderdome. It's just a horrible, tragic, unfortunate humanitarian catastrophe. And that's what drives a lot of African illegal migrants into Europe, which has its own problem set. But I think that, not all of Africa is that way, but enough of it is. And so I think what we're going to see, though, is that, despite every couple of years, there's like this jubilance about Africa's on the way up. And, President Obama had an Africa summit like a year or two ago in Washington, D.C., when all the right words were said, but nothing comes out of these things, in my opinion. There's always empty pledges and nothing really changes. I think ultimately, and this might sound kind of harsh, but Africans need to step up and take charge of their own countries and continents. And there's no rule of law there, right? Well, there's very little, in my opinion. And that's not something that can be fixed with outside development money. That needs to come. They need to have leadership. We have some. We've had Nelson Mandela in South Africa as one of the best examples of that, but he's unusual. A lot of African leaders are very corrupt. They care more about their regime than about their country. In fact, countries are more regimes than countries. So there's a lot of problems. I don't see any viable solution on our immediate horizon.
Well, for the longest time, Egypt was the one area of sanity in all of Africa. But even that is digressing now, and I have no idea what we're going to expect out of there, because people completely forget that when Benghazi was being attacked, just hours beforehand, our consulate in Cairo was being attacked for the very same reason. And it's not a coincidence. It was both on 9/11 at the same time. I still say it's orchestrated, and we still have to take a really good look at what's going on in Egypt there.
Yeah, Egypt is also a simmering kettle right now, and Hosni Mubarak, the former leader of Egypt, was a pretty ruthless dictator. But what they have right now is even worse, and we're seeing this pattern of we see one bad guy leave, but what replaces that person's even worse. And Egypt is a pivotal country in that area in northwest Africa and the Middle East. And depending on if Egypt was to collapse again, that would be very bad for the entire region. It would really be destabilizing. So yeah, I think Egypt is something to keep one's eye on.
Yeah, because we have our bases there. You got the Suez Canal, and it's the only. I think Egypt at this time is the only thing that's keeping Israel going. Even though they're enemies, they're still codependent upon each other.
They're codependent. No, and historically, we've leaned on and we've depended on Egypt's stability, even though they were not a perfect regime. They provided some stability to a very unstable region, and that is all up in the air right now. I mean, I think the Muslim Brotherhood now has been expunged, which is good, from Egypt, but they've got a military junta, for lack of a better word, there in place, and we don't know who they're going to align with. But yes, they're a strategic country, and they're a brittle country, I think, right now too.
Yeah, and under this presidency, I have never seen a world stage being upturned as violently as ever before. And the last time you could see something like that would have been World War II. Now, are we heading into a World War III, or are we already in World War III?
Well, this is a really good question, Annie. I mean, I think that what we're seeing a world of disorder, and I think some of that is partly to be expected. I mean, after the Cold War, the world, for a lot of things started to happen that was good, but also fraying upon world order. But I think now we're going to enter an era, the 21st century, where state and global governance, the governance of countries, will matter less. And you're seeing transnational actors like terrorists and others rise. And what we desperately need and do not have in this country is a grand strategy. During the Cold War, we had a grand strategy called containment. It gave us logic and rationalized all of our foreign policy. We could all say, okay, here's our plan. We want to contain the Soviet Union. Let's organize ourselves to do that. After the Cold War ended, we never replaced that, and we've been strategically adrift. And I think what we urgently need in this country is a viable grand strategy and how to deal with disorder for the 21st century.
Well, it's amazing because when you talk about the Cold War, they used to run actual strategies. Well, if X, Y, Z happened, how do we respond to it? Or if ABC is occurring, how do we respond to it? I don't see this administration doing anything like that. There's no plan. It's more as like, all right, it's going to be the quickest, response, not even reaction, because they couldn't even react to the attack in Benghazi. You see nothing. I see nothing on the plate whatsoever.
Well, yeah, when you see, I teach strategy at the War College here in Washington. I mean, I'm a professor at Georgetown University and also at the National Defense University, which is the Pentagon's premier war college. And the students I teach are colonels and, very high-ranking military, and not just from our country, from other countries too. And when you see a government always in crisis reaction mode, that is a sure tell sign that there's no strategy. I mean, strategies exist. A good strategy exists so you don't go into crisis reaction mode. And I fear that that's what we've been doing for the last, several years, is that rather than having a strategy that gives us some guidance and aligns the federal government, we just see these like eruptions of fits and spurts of efforts that don't even, that work across purposes across the government even too. So I think we need a strategy. We don't have one. The fact that we have crisis action, reaction, this shows that.
Yeah, well, now, what I also see, especially with the war on terror, the rise of the contractor, the private contractor in place of soldiers. Is this a good strategy for our government to employ, rather going away from using our military to using private contractors?
Well, this is a great question, and it's part of my research. I mean, I was a contractor myself after I left as an 82nd Airborne Division, and I was doing some very interesting things that arguably no contractor should be doing, that should be left to the CIA or the Department of Defense, things that are arguably inherently governmental. And I wrote a book about this called The Modern Mercenary, which is a nonfiction book, and then the novel Shadow War has all the stuff that I couldn't, it's in fiction, but it's really nonfiction about how this world of contracting really works, how mercenaries really work, because we have a new emerging market for mercenaries around the world. People don't know this right now, but mercenaries are coming back. And the danger, of course, is that mercenaries, I mean, this sort of is a byproduct of the U.S. outsourcing and relying on contractors during the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. We outsourced half of our military was contracted, half. And now what happens when the U.S. is done with those contractors is they look for new clients. And that's creating this worldwide mercenary market. And mercenaries are incentivized to start conflicts and to expand conflicts for profit. And we have a lot of evidence, like during the Middle Ages, when everybody in the Middle Ages used mercenaries to fight for the most part, including popes and stuff like that, they would do that. And also when they were in between contracts, they became predators, they became bandits. And that's the world that we're going to that's contributing to this, what I described earlier as this worldwide disorder, is that we have all these groups out there that they'll work for the highest bidder. And we've seen this in the Middle East, we've seen this in Africa, and we'll see this probably in Latin America in the future, in my opinion.
Well, I would probably say, yeah, you already see it in Latin America because a lot of these mercenaries are also working for the drug lords. They're also helping with bringing the illegals in. We're seeing them in some of the most nefarious places. So when you say contractors, not all these contractors are good guys. I mean, you got the guys in Benghazi that were the good guys, but not worldwide.
No, look, I mean, not all contractors are bad. Some contractors are good. But you have contractors who, when their contract is up with the U.S. government, will look elsewhere. Some will go home and become unemployed. Some will say, I only work for the U.S. government. But some will say, like, Eric Prince, for example, he was the founder of Blackwater. And your listeners may remember Blackwater. During 2007, a squad of Blackwater private military contractors shot 17, 18 innocent Iraqis in Baghdad at a traffic circle called New Source Square. And this became one of the low points of Iraq. Eric Prince founded this company. He then left the company, and now he's working for China and Africa, doing God knows what, doing mercenary type things. And there's this whole industry, again, that we see, the Emirates hiring Colombian mercenaries to go fight their war in Yemen against the Houthis. We saw Nigeria hire mercenaries to take care of Boko Haram, who did. I mean, the Nigerian military for 6 years could not defeat Boko Haram. Nigeria hired some mercenaries, and they took care of it in weeks. We're seeing mercenaries in Iraq and Syria. Putin hires mercenaries like crazy. They're all over the Ukraine. The book Shadow War goes into the realities of that. So we're seeing this. This wasn't like, it's not the U.S.'s fault, but, the U.S. relying on the contractors so much has created this industry that others around the world are imitating. And it has the power to reshape, global security governance. And that's the concern.
They answer to no one. I mean, they just slip into the shadows. All right. So maybe I committed this crime, in Venezuela. So I just leave Venezuela and go work for China where they can't get me. They answer to no one.
Right.
So
they also they operate in countries that nobody's going to get them anyway. I mean, even just say you're a mercenary outfit, you're operating in Iraq or Yemen or the Sudan. Who's going to get them anyway? I mean, even those governments couldn't get them. And the thing about mercenaries, they can shoot back. If you send law enforcement, police after them, they could kill your police. So once you have a market for mercenaries, they're impossible to regulate. And that's what's happening now. It's slowly. This is an underground trend that nobody's paying attention to because we're thinking about terrorism and Russia, which are big threats. But this is like a slow-cooking threat that has the power to, can you imagine if ISIS decides they want to hire an attack helicopter squadron for 2 weeks out of Africa? We may be getting to that. It could be very devastating. So this is a threat. This is more of a medium-term threat than a near threat.
Yeah, and when we think of things globally, we think of a nation dealing with another nation. But when you throw the mercenaries in there, national borders do not mean anything. The laws do not mean anything. The UN means nothing. And this is a cancer that is...
laws...
Yeah.
Yeah. it's like El Paso in the 1880s. I mean, but much worse. It is, and this is, international law to be ignored. I mean, it's like the Middle East, but larger and wider, and with states. States could even be held hostage by mercenary groups. And there's a lot of angles to this that people haven't really thought about that are very, very dangerous. And I think we're on the precipice of that now.
Man, it's a very scary, and I'm definitely going to have to get your book. I'm going to have AJ send it over to me, add it to my list.
Yeah.
But you got to make sure.
Shadow War is, it's actually it's a novel, but it's mostly nonfiction, and it sort of it pulls back the veil on all of this new way of war. Terrorists, militia and strongmen and mafia, mercenaries, cyber, all that's in. It's actually about how war is fought, and it's a fun read too. You can get it on Amazon or Barnes and Noble. There's an ebook as well and an audiobook, so there's lots of ways to read it.
Well, I need you to sign your book so I can add it to my collection of other authors sitting here. Matter of fact, my bookcase is starting to get so full, I'm going to need to buy a second bookcase.
I'll be happy to.
Well, Sean, your website is your name, SeanMcFate.com, and people can check it out and read your biography on there, because if I were to start reading your entire biography, I'd be here for like another 20 minutes. And good luck on the new baby. Congratulations, Daddy.
Thank you.
Thank
you very much. Yeah, it is. It's great. It's a whole new phase indeed. I've hung up the combat boots and changing diapers, so it's good though.
Well, you can tell your wife I said if the kid is half as good looking as you, watch out, ladies, in 20 years.
She's a good looking one, trust me.
All right. Well, I'm going to have the rest of the description up on the show page. The link is there. Majority of people that listen to the show listen to the podcast later on. Will get thousands of hits, so they can click on it and go and get your book and check you out. Sean, it has been a pleasure, and you were supposed to be here for only half an hour, and I kept you for the full hour.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure. I really enjoyed this.
All right. Check it out. Sean McFate, SeanMcFate.com. And Glenn, we're down to our last 6.5 minutes, and it's time to do a wrap-up. It has been a very exciting show. Great guests. We're going to be back here on Friday. And Friday we have a fellow radio host, Tim Constantine. He's got the Capitol Hill Briefing radio show. And we're going to have also Melanie Graft. I don't know if anyone remembers, but earlier this year, there was a young girl that went to the public library in Texas and ended up finding all these books that were all pro-LGBT community in the children's section promoting this lifestyle. And it made the news, and she's going to be here talking about what has been going on, the brainwashing of our children. I still say, you get someone, a young child like that, and try to convince them that they're the wrong gender, that's child abuse, folks. That is just pure child abuse. But we'll be back here on... Yeah, we'll be back here on Friday with some great guests. And then next week, we've got Carrie Zuros is going to be with us. Danae is coming back, talking about her album release. And Mike Gonzalez will be joining us. But you got to remember, September 16th is Constitution Day. Get yourself a handful of constitutions and start handing it out to school kids on the 16th. We'll be talking about the Constitution later on this month. And I can't believe the show is already over. I want to thank everyone that was listening up in the chat room and in the studio. It has been a fun, fantastic show. It is primary day in Florida. So if you're in Florida, get out there and vote. It's a very, very important election. We need to take our nation back one seat at a time. And that's it, folks. I think that's all I got to say. Glenn, you got anything coming up?
No, I think it's great that you're having Melanie Graff on too. I had her a couple months ago on my show. It's a great story, folks. You should listen for sure. Yeah,
it is. Well, I say until then now. Everyone get out there, as Vito says, vote early, vote often, vote the Democrat way. Say until then, I will say good night and God bless. Be safe and happy out there.
If you like your health care plan, you'll be able to keep your health care plan. Health care plan.
redistribute when we make our pay tax. Hey, district town, don't be a jerk, 'cause none deserve it better than the ones who won't work. We're gonna throw away what I owe for this road. Use your hard-earned money just to buy a new boat. Welcome to the place. Welcome to the place of the left hypocrisy. Little piece houses for you and me. Oh, welcome to the face. Welcome to the face of the new democracy. Here in the land of the not so free. Party not discretion service for her own cause. We got a pen and telephone to bypass all your laws. Political courageous will replace the Bill of Rights. Support religious freedom, bless you, praise Jesus Christ. The breath is in our pockets, so there's no free. You cannot make a move without the NSAPC. Don't expect equality, respect for fair play. The IRS will target those who vote the wrong way. Welcome to the face. Welcome to the face of the left hypocrisy. Little beach houses for you and me. Oh, welcome to the face. Welcome to the face of the new democracy. Here in the land of the not so free. Oh, 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 oh.
This is the most transparent administration in history. Not even a smidgen of corruption.
Fact is, we had 4 dead Americans. What difference at this point does it make?
If you got a business, you didn't build that.